I want to tell you the moment I stopped making excuses for him. Not the moment I found out. I will get to that. I will tell you exactly what the footage showed and exactly what his face looked like when there was nothing left to say. And the screen was showing everyone in that room the truth. He had been hiding behind a woman who cleaned our floors for $9 an hour. I will tell you all of it. But the moment I stopped making excuses was earlier than that. The moment I stopped making excuses was a Thursday evening in November when I came home from a 12-hour shift, took off my shoes at the door, sat down on the edge of my bed, and opened my work bag to count what was left. There was $60. There should have been $240. I sat on that edge of that bed, and I counted the $60 twice. And then I sat very still for a long time in the way you sit still when your body knows something your mind is still negotiating. It was not the first time. That is the thing I need you to understand before anything else. It was not the first time. And every time before this one, I had found an explanation. I had told myself I miscounted. I had told myself I spent more than I remembered, that the lunch I bought on Tuesday had been more expensive than I thought, that I had made a withdrawal I forgot about. I had offered my own memory as the unreliable thing in the equation because making my memory the problem was easier than making my father the problem, and I had been making that choice in one form or another for 24 years. I am a home health aide. I work long shifts in other people's houses, helping people who cannot fully help themselves, doing the kind of work that is invisible until it is not done, and that is paid in the specific range that tells you exactly how a society values the care of its most vulnerable people, which is to say not enough, which is to say every dollar I brought home was a dollar I had traded a piece of my body and my time and my patience for, and there was no dollar in my bag that had not cost me something real. I had been living at home for 2 years, not because I wanted to. I want to be clear about that. I had lived on my own for 3 years in my early 20s, and I had lost my apartment in the specific cascade that happens when a medical bill arrives at the same time as a car repair arrives at the same time as a cut in hours. And the cascade had landed me back in my childhood home with Ronald and Joyce, and my brother Derek, who had never left, who had never been asked to leave, who existed in that house with the comfortable permanence of a man whose parents had decided that his presence was a gift they were grateful for rather than an arrangement that required contribution. Derek did not work. I want to say that plainly because it is the plainest part of the story. Derek was 26 years old, and he did not work and had not worked in any sustained way since he was 19, and nobody in the house had a conversation with him about this that led anywhere, because Ronald's conversations with Derek led to the same place Ronald's conversations with Derek always led, which was Ronald finding a reason why Derek's situation was understandable and temporary, and not requiring the kind of firm expectation that Ronald had never once hesitated to apply to me. I paid rent, $150 a month, which was below market, and I knew it, and I paid it because I was living in their house. And because even below market, it was money I had to account for and plan around, and it was money that came from the bag I carried home from 12-hour shifts and set on the chair by the door. The chair by the door, where Ronald passed it every day. I need to stop here and tell you about the cleaner before I tell you about the camera, because the cleaner is the part of the story that I cannot tell without my voice doing something that I have to manage carefully. Her name was Rosa. She came on Tuesday and Friday mornings for 3 hours, had been coming for 2 years, had cleaned that house with the specific thoroughness of a woman who took her work seriously, and who had, in 2 years, never taken so much as a pen from a surface or a coin from a counter. I know this because I knew Rosa. I knew her the way you know someone who comes regularly and who you treat as a person rather than a service. I knew that she had 2 kids, that the Tuesday shifts were the ones that worked around her daughter's school schedule, that she was saving for something she mentioned once and didn't elaborate on. And I didn't press. I knew her, and I respected her. And when Ronald first said, in September, that he thought some money might have gone missing from the house, and that he wasn't sure, but he thought maybe things weren't always exactly where he left them, when he first pointed the vagueness of it in Rosa's direction, I had not let myself hear what he was doing. I had not let myself hear it because hearing it meant dealing with it, and dealing with it meant confronting something I was not ready to confront. So I had not heard it until the Thursday in November with $60 in a bag that should have had $240, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I stopped not hearing it. I did the math that night, not the math I should have done months earlier, the specific, documented math of a woman who was going to find out exactly what had been taken. And when I went back through my phone, through the banking app, through the records of what I had withdrawn, and when, through the notes I kept in a small notebook about my weekly cash, I kept these notes because I budgeted carefully and carefully required documentation, and the documentation was there, waiting to be read as evidence rather than as accounting. 7 months. 7 months of shortfalls. Not every week, not so regular that it would have been obvious, not so consistent that it could not be attributed to my own forgetfulness. Every 10 days or so. Amounts between $40 and $80. Always from the bag. Always gone before I thought to check. Always explicable by the explanations I had been willing to make. Added together across 7 months, the number was not small. I sat with it. I thought about Rosa. I thought about the way Ronald had mentioned her name in September with the vagueness that was not quite an accusation but was shaped like one, placed where an accusation would be placed, doing the work an accusation does in a room of people who are willing to let it do that work. And then again in October, not to me, but to Joyce in a conversation I had heard from the hallway. I don't know, Joyce, I just think we should be more careful about who we let in the house. Letting it land without landing. Letting Rosa's name be adjacent to the concern without being named directly, because Ronald had a long and practiced history of doing damage with the shapes of words rather than the words themselves. Rosa could lose that job. 2 kids. Tuesday mornings around the school schedule. Whatever she was saving for. Rosa could lose that job on the basis of a vagueness that Ronald was constructing around her like a frame while he walked past my bag every morning and took what he took. I went to the building manager the next day. Marcus managed the property. The building itself had a small camera system that had been installed 2 years earlier for security reasons after a break-in on the street, and the camera at the front covered the entrance hallway, which included, from a certain angle, the chair by the door, where I put my bag. I explained to Marcus what I suspected and what I needed. He was not required to show me the footage. I want to be honest about that. He was under no obligation, legally or otherwise, to pull that recording for a tenant's personal matter. What he was a decent man who listened to me explain the situation, who heard what I said about Rosa and what was being implied about her, and who looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, he called me into his office. He had pulled 2 weeks of footage, not 7 months. The system only held 2 weeks, but 2 weeks was enough. 2 weeks contained 4 instances, 4 separate mornings, clear in the timestamp and in the image of Ronald coming down the hallway before I was awake, in the specific, unhurried way of a man who had done something enough times to be comfortable doing it, lifting the flap of my bag, reaching in, and removing what he removed and putting it in his pocket. 4 instances. In 2 weeks, clear enough that there was no alternative reading, no angle from which it looked like something else. Just Ronald and my bag and the money and his pocket. I watched all 4 without speaking. Marcus watched me watch them. When the last one finished, he said, What do you need? I thought about what I needed. I thought about Rosa first, which I am not saying for credit. I am saying it because it is true, because Rosa was the person most immediately at risk, and the threat to her was the first thing that needed to be addressed before I could address anything else. I asked Marcus if he could be present when I spoke to my parents. I asked if he could bring the footage. I asked him to be a witness, specifically to Rosa's name being cleared, specifically to that being said in front of my mother Joyce, who had heard the insinuations and had not pushed back on them. He said yes. We did it that evening. Joyce was in the kitchen. Ronald was in the living room watching television in the particular settled way of a man who considers the day managed. Derek was somewhere. Derek was always somewhere, peripheral, present in the way people are present when they have no stake in the household's functioning because they have never been asked to develop one. I brought Marcus in. Ronald looked up when a man he didn't recognize came into his living room, and his face did the thing it did when he was caught off guard. A brief exposure of the unmanaged expression underneath the managed one, gone quickly, replaced by the pleasantness he used with strangers. "Who's this?" he said. "This is Marcus." I said. "He manages the building. He has something to show you." Marcus had the footage on a tablet. He set it on the coffee table, and he pressed play. Ronald watched himself walk down the hallway. Ronald watched himself lift the flap of my bag. Ronald watched himself reach in. Ronald watched himself put the money in his pocket. The living room was absolutely quiet. Joyce had come in from the kitchen. She had heard the silence, and the silence had brought her in the way a particular silence draws people toward its source. She stood in the doorway. I watched her watch the screen. I watched her face understand what her eyes were showing her, and I watched the understanding arrive in her body, the way difficult truths arrive, not all at once, but in waves, each one taking something she had been certain about and replacing it with something she was going to have to learn to carry. The 4 instances played. Marcus stopped the footage. Ronald had not said anything. He had watched himself on a screen 4 times, and he had not said anything. And I want to tell you what his face looked like in that silence, because I have been telling you about faces in these family rooms for a long time now, and this one was different. This was not the calculated silence of a person deciding on a strategy. This was the specific, exposed silence of a person who has been practicing a deception so comfortably for so long that they have forgotten the deception requires a secret, and the secret is gone, and there is nothing left between them and what they have done. He looked small, my father, who had filled rooms my entire life, with his certainty, with his redirections, with the managed vagueness he used to do damage without fingerprints, looked small on his own couch in front of a tablet showing his own hands in my own bag. Joyce said, "Ronald." Just his name, in a voice I had never heard from my mother, not the managing voice, not the accommodating voice, something underneath both of those, something older, something that came from a place in her that had not been entirely extinguished by 28 years of choosing Ronald's version of things. Ronald said, "It was only—" "Don't," I said. He stopped. "I know exactly how much it was," I said. "I did the math. 7 months. I don't have the footage for all of it, but I have the records, and I have 2 weeks of what Marcus pulled, and it is enough." I looked at my father. "I want you to hear something," I said. "Rosa did not take anything. Rosa has never taken anything. Whatever you said to Mom in October about being careful about who you let in this house, I need you to say out loud, right now, in front of Marcus, that Rosa did not take anything, and that you were wrong to let her name sit in that conversation the way you let it sit." Ronald looked at Marcus. He looked at Joyce. He looked at me. "Rosa didn't take anything," he said. His voice had the quality of something deflated. All the air gone out of the performance, Nothing left but the flat, reluctant admission. It wasn't Rosa. Say it clearly, I said. Say it like you mean it, because I need Marcus to have heard it clearly. Rosa is not responsible for anything, Ronald said. I was wrong to suggest it. Marcus wrote something in the small notebook he had brought. I looked at my father, and I felt the thing I had been trying not to feel for 7 months, which was not the rage. The rage had been there longer than 7 months. The rage had been quietly fueling the math and the records and the decision to go to Marcus. But underneath the rage was the thing that the rage had been covering, which was grief. The specific grief of a daughter who had wanted her father to be something he was not and had been finding out for 24 years that he was not it, and had kept wanting anyway, because wanting is not a faucet you can turn off just because the water is bad. I was done wanting. I understood that clearly, standing in that living room with Marcus's tablet on the coffee table and Ronald deflated on the couch. I was done. I said, I will be finding my own place as soon as I am able to. I will continue to pay rent until I leave because I said I would, and I keep my word. But I want you to understand something before I go back to my room tonight. Ronald looked up. I worked 12-hour shifts, I said. I drove to other people's houses, and I helped people who could not help themselves. And I came home with money I had earned by being present in the hardest moments of strangers' lives. And you reached into my bag and took it. You took it, and you let Rosa's name be in the room where the question was being asked, and you went back to your television. Joyce made a sound. I am not asking you to explain it, I said. There is no explanation that does anything for me. I am telling you what it was, so that it is said out loud in this room and cannot be unsaid. Ronald did not speak. There was nothing in his face that looked like the beginning of a response. I turned to Marcus, and I said, Thank you. I appreciate you doing this. Of course, Marcus said. He closed his tablet. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had seen difficult things in his work and who was, in this moment, simply glad to have been useful in a way that mattered. He left. I went to my room. I sat on the same edge of the same bed, where I had sat the Thursday before, and counted $60 and made the decision to stop making excuses. And I sat there for a long time in the quiet of a house that had gone very still. Joyce knocked on my door 20 minutes later. She came in, and she sat on the chair in the corner, and she looked at her hands. She said, I didn't know. I know, I said. I believe you. I should have pushed back, she said. In October, when he said what he said about Rosa, I should have asked him how he knew. Yes, I said. She stopped. I have spent so long not asking how he knows things. I looked at my mother, Joyce, who had spent 28 years in a house organized around Ronald's certainty, who had learned not to ask how he knew things because asking had consequences she had learned to avoid, who had loved me in the specific limited way of a woman whose love was real, but whose will had been slowly worn down by the daily work of managing a man like Ronald. I know, Mom, I said. Are you going to be okay? She said. I thought about it honestly. I'm going to be better than okay. I said. I'm going to be in my own place. I'm going to have a bag I can put down somewhere without counting what's in it before I fall asleep. She cried. I let her. I did not cry yet. That would come later, in the specific private way that my crying had always come, alone, after the thing was over, when the adrenaline of having done the hard thing gave way to the feeling of what the hard thing had cost. I would cry later for the girl who had made excuses for 7 months, because making excuses had felt safer than the truth. I would cry for Rosa and the insinuation she had never known was being made in her direction. I would cry for the 12-hour shifts and the careful budgeting and the notebook with the records that had waited patiently to become evidence. But not yet. I found my apartment 3 weeks later. A studio, small and entirely mine, with a door that locked with a key that only I had and a chair by the door where I put my bag every night and never once counted what was in it before I trusted it to sit there. I called Rosa on the day I got the keys. I had gotten her number from the building. Marcus had it. And I called her and I told her what I wanted her to know, which was that nothing had ever been missing on her account, that someone had used her proximity to cover their own actions, and that it had been addressed and documented, and she had nothing to worry about. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something in a voice that was very controlled, in the specific way people control their voices when they are managing relief that is larger than the conversation. She said, "I wondered." "You don't have to wonder anymore," I said. She said, "Thank you for telling me." I said, "You deserve to know." We stayed on the phone a little longer. She asked how I was doing, and I told her I had found a place, and she said that was good. She said that was really good. And I heard in her voice the simple warmth of one working woman for another, the recognition between people who show up for hard things and keep their integrity intact and deserve to have someone tell them so. I hung up and I stood in my studio apartment, my own floor, my own walls, my own key, and I thought about what it had cost to get here. The 7 months of excuses, the math on a Thursday night, the walk to Marcus's office, the tablet on the coffee table and Ronald's face and the 4 instances and the deflated admission, and the night I sat on the edge of my bed for the second time in a week and understood something completely. I thought about what it cost, and then I put my bag on the chair by the door, and I left it there, and I went to bed, and I slept the way I had not slept in 7 months, not counting, not calculating, not bracing for the morning and what might be missing from it. Just sleeping. In a room that was mine. In a life I had earned. In the specific, unremarkable, extraordinary piece of a woman who has stopped making excuses for people who never deserve them and started, finally, making space for herself. That space, that quiet, that bag on that chair. Mine. All of it mine. No one else's hands in it. Not ever again.